Hello and welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. This is a show where we take the legendarium created by J.R.R. Tolkien and have a good, simple, wholesome chat about it. Sometimes it's a drunk person, me, trying to explain stories or events, and sometimes it's breaking down the stories and concepts as if we're talking to a drunk person. I'm Chris, I'm an avid Tolkien nerd, I'm still learning and realising how much I actually don't know. And joining me is your co-host and my lovely wife Rebecca. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Rebecca, a complete novice to all things Tolkien and nerdy in general, although now I've watched all 3 films, extended editions, and can now confirm that I have been converted to the religion headed by L. Ron Tubbard.
Long may he live. Right.
Sultan.
That's the intro sorted. Let's get into today's episode. Hello. How are you?
I'm alright. Slightly bewildered underneath this quilt.
Yeah. So I saw it in a YouTube video. No, TikTok, sorry. Do you know that girl who goes around the different types of hotels and then rates them?
Yeah.
She was doing a voiceover under a duvet and I was like, oh shit, that's a really ghetto way to do it. So I picked up a privacy screen, an office divider from a Specsavers in Sunderland that was they said it just been laying around the office. He gave us it for free. Gonna cover that with soundproof foam. And then going to get a microphone arm so that we don't have to do this. We're balancing the microphone on a D&D book and sat with a duvet over us facing each other with my phone and Becca's notes. So yeah, it's very ghetto in our house at the moment. But yeah, second episode of the week. I was going to ask how you've been, but I already know. But it'll be a week between these episodes. So anything new in your life?
Nope. I'm trying to think, actually. Is there anything exciting happened? It's mainly just child things at the minute.
No.
Our child's just really cool.
You went back to the gym yesterday. That was good.
Yeah, first time at the gym.
Yeah, nice.
Not ever. I have been at the gym on multiple occasions.
I am aware of these gymnasiums you speak of.
Yeah, it was full of teenagers flexing their little muscles. So I just got myself on a bike and got pedalling and got out as fast as possible.
Nice. Well, today we're covering the Istari. Oh, this one has been a bugger. In that, do you know how I've said before that every time we do an episode, there's so much I've got to cut out?
Yes.
Every member of the Istari is their own episode. And that, I think, is reflected in this. So, going into this, dear listener, this is an overview of the Order of Wizards. This is an overview of the Istari. I'll go through their purpose, who they are, and briefly kind of what they did or what they did or didn't achieve throughout their times. And then, as always, we end with a little fun fact. This week's fun fact is slightly depressing for me. Oh, well. Do you have anything to add before we start, or shall I just jump into it? Because you've done some research this week, haven't you?
Yes, so I thought I'd make some effort and do a little bit of research so I don't sound completely thick.
You don't.
I do. I just, some weeks I feel like people must think I've lived underneath a box. However, obviously I have learned quite a lot through the process of this podcast, so I am getting better. But I mean, the names still are out there for me.
Well, names this week are a hot topic. There's five members of the Istari, right?
Yeah.
And not a lie, every one of them has got at least 2 names. Saruman has fucking loads. But,
great. I'm excited then. Let's get cracking.
So, well, I know generally what your research was. So do you want to just chip in when your research is relevant to what we're talking about?
Don't big up this research so
No,
much.
I know. It's nice that, as we were saying last week with the Eagles, you're kind of crossing over into doing real world research, which is nice. That not to big myself up, but it's nice that you kind of you're at the point now where you're giving back. You're not just kind of
rude.
No, it's not. You're not just learning anymore. It's you're actively contributing to the podcast. I'd love to see you do some fucking editing. If you really want to contribute.
Christopher, this started as one episode of a podcast that you asked for.
Don't act like you're doing me a favour.
One podcast
I asked if you want
before you turn 30.
Right, I asked if you wanted to keep going, and you say yeah. So here we are. So
and every week you say, or we'll just do this topic. We start recording, and then you say, oh, this really is more than one video.
Hang on, I've
One
never said we'll just do this topic.
No. What I'm meaning is, we do one topic, and you say, right, this week we're doing the Ents. And then you say, as we're recording, I find out, oh, actually, there's loads of information about the Ents. I think this could take a couple of weeks.
Whatever.
Yeah, we haven't even started with the dwarves.
No, we haven't. We need to go back to the Silmarillion so we can get to the first stage dwarves who are mint. But anyway, for those people who find married people arguing a turn on, wipe yourself off because we're going to continue the episode.
Oh, you are just something else.
Have you seen that T-shirt? That's someone I saw it online. It was someone kept wearing a T-shirt everywhere that said "Don't bully me, I'll come."
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Istari, big subject. Lots of theory for two of the members because we don't know much about them, but there is a lot to go through. Now, the Istari are the wizards, right? What do you know about the wizards in Lord of the Rings or Middle Earth in general?
There's blue, grey, and white wizards. Is that right?
Yeah, blue, grey, white, and there's one more colour.
Brown.
Yeah. Radagast the Brown.
And it's not as if they're necessarily like good and bad, like definite. They seem to have all like they're just there to kind of intervene in certain areas and they're not like all powerful.
Well, yeah, they
like
were,
the gods are.
They were sent by the Valar.
Yeah.
And they were definitely sent by the good guys to do good, but not in a way that, like the direct way that, like, same way that the Valar won't directly intervene.
Yeah.
It's to motivate people. So we'll go into it. Now, the Istari comes from their formal title, which is the Order of the Wizards. The Quenya formal name for them was Heren Istarion.
Can we just recap on who the Quenya
Right, so
are?
there is a few main languages in Lord of the Rings. Elves speak Sindarin, which is the main language that elves speak. Every time you hear an elf speak, it's probably Sindarin.
Okay.
Secondary to that, in the older language, is Quenya.
Okay, right.
Which comes from the Quendi, which is what the elves were called. So the Quenya name for the Order of the Wizards was Heren Istarion. And the singular in Quenya is Istar, which translates to one who knows. Like I mentioned, Quenyan's a language spoken by the elves and the Valar in a man. So I was looking into this, and I thought that it was just an elvish language, and I was like, why the fuck are the Valar speaking it? It turns out the Ainur, like the Valar and the Maiar, had their own language called Valarin. However, it was so alien to elves that it sometimes sounded genuinely horrible to listen to. And so the Valar and the Maiar started speaking Quenya instead, which that sounds a bit Lovecraftian. The idea of like something speaking and it sounds awful to you because you're not able to replicate the sounds or whatever. Like, do you know, like have like that Cthulhu Thetagan stuff of like like cultists chant it in Lovecraft.
Yeah.
It's just fucking crazy. So that's Quenya. In Sindarin, their name was Ithrin. And the name used by men. And in Middle-earth, I think we've covered it before, it was one of the fun facts about the language used by men in Middle-earth, is in Westron, which is the language of the common language of Middle-earth that Tolkien, quote-unquote, translates into English. It's just wizards. And it doesn't mean wizard in the same way that we use wizards now, like sorcerer or magician. It's just more means wise man.
Yeah.
And that's, that we'll see with Saruman we'll see with Saruman a lot of that comes around being a wise man. Like he leaned right into that. So who are the Istari? Simply put, it's just 5 Maiar that were sent by the Valar to resist Sauron in the Third Age. They were given the forms of old men and became known as wizards. They were forbidden, like you mentioned, they were forbidden from using force or domination or fighting Sauron directly. So they couldn't just walk up to Mordor or Mirkwood, where he was at the time, and fuck him up. Instead, they had to teach and guide and inspire the peoples in Middle-earth. Not just men, but elves and dwarves as well. But mainly men. There were 5 members, which I think you've said. So there was Saruman the White, Gandalf the Grey, Radagast the Brown, and 2 blue wizards, but their names were never 100% confirmed. But 99.99% they were Alatar and Palando. And there was also a 6th Istari, who was only written about very briefly, and he went to the south, and he was called Jack the Black.
Did he teach at the School of Rock?
He taught the Southrons music, and so by the time of the War of the Ring, they didn't come to fight because they were too chilled out. Oh, that was such a bad joke. I'm sorry. Right, this blew my fucking mind. I found this out today when I was writing these notes, right? We've encountered these 5 Maiar already in our episodes. Like, I know we've talked about Gandalf and Saruman and Radagast, blah, blah, blah. But in one of our early, I think it was the Years of Bliss, perhaps, or the Chaining of Melkor.
We talked about the Blue Wizards.
No, we talked about these Maiar without knowing who they were. So each of these 5 Maiar were sent with Melian to watch over the elves at Cuiveanen during when they first woke up. And I remember in one of the episodes, I think it was the Chaining of Melkor, I said the Valar put guardians around the elves to make sure that they were protected during the war.
Yeah.
Where, when they went and peeled back Autumno.
So they...
It was these 5. These 5 were the guardians. They were the ones who were there.
Ah.
Yeah, what the fuck, man? And yeah, I was just mind blown. So that was during the Valiant year, 866, which was still within the days of bliss. And they were sent there with Melian, as I mentioned, when the Valar invited them to come and live in a man. So when the Valar were making war, that's where they was there guarding the elves, which just... nobody in Middle-earth knew who the Istari were. The only 3 exceptions to that were Círdan, the shipwright, Galadriel, and Elrond, and they knew exactly who they were. But most men assumed that they were old and learned scholars, and they might have changed their opinions a bit when they realised that they just weren't dying. And at that point, men began to assume that they were like some type of elf. Side note, all of the wizards had beards. I found a note today that mentioned that Radagast's was a bit shit. It was just curly, wispy brown hair on his chin. I just feel
That's
bad.
rude.
I just feel bad that Tolkien had to like specifically point that out. As a side note, so elves don't grow beards that we know of, right? Except in their 3rd stage of life, which is like when they're fuck old. Círdan is the only elf we meet in Lord of the Rings who has a beard. And there was one other elf who was called Matan, the smith, and he was the father-in-law of Fëanor, who you've heard me mention as the biggest dickhead to have ever lived. So they had their mission, right? Go to Middle-earth, fight against Sauron, right?
Yeah.
All of them failed, except Gandalf. Saruman and Radagast failed in opposite ways.
Radagast was chilling, so
yeah, that's exactly
just
it.
wasn't interested, hiding in the forest.
That is exactly it, yeah. Tolkien himself wrote that they failed it in different ways. Saruman became proud and domineering, whereas Radagast became neglectful and easygoing. The 2 blues we don't know much about, but like in my opinion, I think we've kind of got to assume that they failed, even though I will offer some counterpoints later on. Being Maiar, they were loosely attached to the Valar that they aligned themselves with. All 5 of them serve Valar. So do you remember us saying that when they all descended into the world when it was created?
Yeah.
That they all kind of like loosely align themselves. Saruman, we'll start with, is Saruman the White, Saruman of many colours, Saruman the Ringmaker, Saruman of many fucking names, Jesus.
How can Saruman be called Saruman the White and Saruman the one of many colours?
Because
Does he wear a jacket like Joseph? Or?
he declares it, yeah, pretty much. He declares himself later on, like he does have like a Technicolor Dreamcoat.
No, Joseph, they know what they say. Come on now, Sauron, you'll make it someday.
But yeah, when he...
Sha-la-la, Sauron.
Yeah, if you want to go and grab a drink, now would be the time, listeners. She might finish soon. Yeah, so Saruman wasn't his original name. Way back in the Valiant years, when elves awoke, like we've just been talking about, he was called Torindor. His Quenya name was also Kurumo, and his Sindarin name is Kurunir. And you've got all these like really grand names, and then at the end of the books, he takes on the fucking nickname Sharky. What a weirdly bullshit name to take on.
That sounds like the novel just turns into like a teen book, doesn't it?
It's just so weird. Like, but you notice I'd like with the others, I'll tell you what their names stand for up front. But with Saruman is Old English for man of skill. Turindor means high or wise-minded, and like you get the point. That basically all of his names translate into someone who is very skilled or very wise. He just kind of leaned right into bigging himself up. He served Aule, the smith, and so did Sauron. So it makes me wonder, does Aule need to look at his hiring policy because he's 2 for 2 on Maiar who turn evil. It's just a bit suspect. Like if I was one of the Valar and we were all sat in a council, I'd be like, oh, Saruman was evil as well. Weird coincidence, and I just fucking stare at him, be like, what are you doing? But
I feel sorry for him. I think he just purely gives them the tools.
Well, you're pretty much onto it there. It's like the argument is made that like Sauron didn't see himself as evil because he wanted to order, like a world full of chaos. He wanted to bring order, obviously at the expense of free will, which obviously Eru was not about. There was a council at which the Istari were going to be chosen, and Saruman was the first one to volunteer himself. That was a parallel to Gandalf, who had to be told to go because Gandalf feared Sauron. He didn't want to go. Whereas Saruman was like, yeah, I'll fucking do it. A prominent feature of Saruman is his jealousy and insecurity, just like we've seen with Melkor.
Yeah.
His main focus of that jealousy and insecurity is Gandalf. Like, he's super bitter and super worried about Gandalf being better than him.
Doesn't want to admit that he also smokes weed.
That was it, yeah, exactly. I read that to you when we were in London, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, so like he started smoking pipeweed after taking the piss out of Gandalf for it, and then hid it because he thought he was going to be mocked. And Gandalf found out about it anyway and just kind of thought, you silly sod, you silly sausage. But yeah, he was bitter, worried about Gandalf being better than him, and I wondered, is this a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because eventually, Gandalf becomes Saruman as he was meant to be.
Yeah.
So, examples of that is he's really jealous about Gandalf being given the ring Narya by Círdan the Shipwright. And then, as you mentioned about the pipeweed. Saruman met his end by being stabbed by Wormtongue during the scouring of the Shire, which you won't have seen in the films because it's only in the books. Shout out to Martin, talking about the scouring of the Shire.
We have flashbacks of it though. Like, not flashbacks, but like
in
visions of it.
Sam's mirror, yeah. Like, I think it's like a nod to it, yeah. When Saruman dies, his spirit rises up and looks to the west and is dissipated by Manwë, and a wind from Manwë. Saruman is then cursed to wander Middle-earth as a discorporate spirit, weak and powerless until the end of time, just like Sauron is. And this goes back to, do you know when we were talking, I was saying that, like, just for a goof, that I think Stairway to Heaven might be, like, influenced by Tolkien. And it's always that there's a feeling I get when I look to the west. It always makes me think of that passage, because it is described as, like, a cloud or something rises up from where Saruman was and looks to the west for a moment before it's rejected.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But that's Saruman. He goes on to be other things, like he's the head of the White Council. Eventually he falls into evil because he looks for the ring, then starts learning about the rings, and eventually tries to make his own. And his plan is to take take the one ring, make his own rings, and become powerful like Sauron. And Gandalf rightly says, he's not going to share power with you, bro. And there's a point where
he's a victim to his own twisted successes.
He became proud.
He's took on far too many things.
It's his pride, yeah. He bred the fighting Uruk-hai, so that's pretty fucked up. His sigil was the white hand, as opposed to the red eye of Mordor. And Gandalf even points out in like the Two Towers that he gives Saruman the chance to redeem himself, and he says, like, even if you'd have won at Helm's Deep, Mordor would still have crushed you. So he gives them the chance to come back to the good side and says that we can, help us undo the damage you've done, and you can be on the right side. He could still have completed his mission, but his pride didn't allow it, and so he was kicked out of the Order, staffless, and made his way to Eriador, to the Shire.
Staffless as in wooden staff.
Yeah, they cut his cock
missing.
off. They cut his cock off.
Not staffless as in
He's all of his staff
all
left.
his staff have been
He really
dismissed.
He only had Wormtongue left. Yeah, so by the time they get to the Shire, there's I think it's Lothor Sackville Baggins. Is like the chief of the Shire under like the direction of Saruman until he takes power for himself, and he builds up a little crew of like thugs around him. But it's just how far have you fallen?
Yeah.
It's just There's a scene where they encounter Saruman, where like right at the end of the book when they're all traveling around, and he's kicking Wormtongue before him, and like Merry and Pippin take pity on him and give him some of their leaf to smoke, and he's just broken. Yeah, but let's move on to the happier one. Let's have a look at Gandalf. Do you know what his name means? Any of his names? Do you know any of his names?
Gandalf the Grey.
Yeah.
Gandalf the White.
Yeah.
Gandalf the Great.
No. Do you know what the name Gandalf means?
No.
It means elf of the staff.
Couldn't even think of anything funny.
Elf of the staff is what Gandalf gets called. His real name I think it's Quenya.
So is he like the Union?
What do you mean?
He's the elf of the staff.
Yeah, he fights on the side of all the staff. His real, I think it's Quenya, is Alorin, and he's a servant to both Manwë and Varda, and was considered by Círdan the shipwright to be the wisest amongst the Order, and Círdan believes that he should have led it, and likewise Saruman was elected to lead the White Council, and Círdan believes that he should have led that as well. But
I think he's just cocky.
He's not. He's the opposite. Fundamentally, he's a humble spirit. Like, he's a very humble person. That's why when the council to choose the Istari was formed, he had to be told to go to Middle-earth, even though he was scared. Like, he feared Sauron, and Manwë said, like, all the more reason for you to go. He has a ton of names in Middle-earth, depending on which people are speaking about him. Hobbits and people in the north generally call him Gandalf. Gondor calls him Mithrandir. In the south, like Harad and stuff like that, he was called Incarnus, and the dwarven name for him was Tharkun. In Rohan, he was called Gandalf Greyhame, although at one point, when Theoden's under the spell of Grima and Saruman, he calls him Gandalf Stormcrow because he always seems to bring trouble with him. Which, there's quite a few people I used to know that I could call Stormcrow. It's like, you always pop up when there's fucking something, you always bring shit with you. Like, whenever your brother has a drink and he just starts talking absolute shit, you're like, you can never just have a nice evening, can you?
Yeah,
I'm going to start calling him Stormcrow.
Yeah, don't invite him to any family occasions.
Oh, yeah, he just starts talking absolute rubbish. There is a line in the book Unfinished Tales that alludes to a theory that Gandalf might have been the last direct intervention of Manwë. And I didn't realise this. So, if we assume that Dagor Dagarath is going to happen, do you know, like the battle at the end of all things?
Yeah.
Like Ragnarok? That Manwë is said that he would ascend Taniquetil and would not come down until Dagor Dagarath. And it was speculated that Gandalf was Manwë in disguise as his last foray into the world until he ascends the mountain. I mean, it's dispelled pretty quickly, but it is fascinating to think of. And the way it's dispelled is that Tolkien writes, Manwë sent Eonwë to fight Morgoth in like the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. So and Eonwë was the greatest of the Maiar. So why the fuck would he come himself for like this little bitch Sauron? Those are Tolkien's exact words. Fascinating. Like, I'd never heard that theory before, because we've also briefly touched on last week that Gandalf seems awfully Jesus-like. And then you've got the actual king of the... Like, he might have been the king of the Valar in the flesh.
Yeah.
Which would have been pretty cool, but yeah. Oh, well.
He's also, like... I read somewhere where he's, like... They said he's got responsibility for all kinds as well. So, like, he's got responsibility over all kinds of being in Middle-earth. In terms of, like, the elves, the dwarves.
Yeah.
Like, he helps to defend all of them.
Oh, yeah. And Manwë is the king of kings. He's
the ones that are classed as, like, good, aren't they?
Yeah, like, Manwë is the king of kings as well. He's the high king of Arda. So that would kind of fit, yeah. Like, yeah, well, that's interesting. But when Gandalf landed at Mithlond, which is in the Grey Havens, do you know where they get their boat at the end of the films?
Yeah.
That's Mithlond. Círdan recognised Gandalf's, like, potential/wisdom and surrendered to him the Ring Naya. And he said to Gandalf, Take this ring, master, for your labours will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the ring of fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill, which is a beautiful quote. Fun fact, we're recording this on the 1st of June. The Silmarillion comes out on Audible this month, read by Andy Serkis, which I am fucking pumped for.
I feel like Andy Serkis is
He's
the soundtrack to our driving anyway.
Yeah, he is, yeah. Because the fucking long books, and I love him. He's class. Like, I just, the amount of effort he puts into the characters.
Even our child knows who Andy Serkis is.
Yeah, I think there's another version that people online really rate. Like, I think it's called like Rob Inglis or something like that. I need to try that one. But Serkis was the first audiobook one that I tried. And yeah, I loved it. But yeah, I won't go too much more into Gandalf, like the events and his history with the hobbits, etc. Because he's his own episode. So we won't say much about that.
Here we go. Here's another episode.
Yeah. We're up for 2 episodes out of this 1 episode already. He was part of the White Council, which included Saruman, but not Radagast. So that's pretty telling. I won't spoil it, but Radagast isn't viewed very highly. As you'll all know, like whoever's listening to this, unless it's the one person who's never read or heard of Lord of the Rings and has found this podcast, in which case, email me and let me know how the fuck you found us. Gandalf played a major part throughout the War of the Ring, and he eventually returned to a man. And it's never explicitly stated, right, as far as I could tell, but I would like this to be true. So do you know at the end of the films, and the end of the book, where Frodo and Bilbo set off for the Undying Lands? And I've mentioned before, like, they go in the ship across the sea.
You don't need to look at me at this bit, you know, like, I can just see a mouth at this point.
Yeah, I'm lifting the duvet up. But anyway, so do you know at the end where they go to the Undying Lands in the ship?
Yeah.
And I've mentioned before that they don't actually go to Aman, they go to Tol Eressëa, the island off the coast. And Samwise later joins them. I like to think Gandalf kept his form of Gandalf long enough that Bilbo, Frodo, and Samwise could grow old, because they'd quicken their lifespan, and die in peace in Tol Eressëa, and have Gandalf there as a comforting figure before he took his form of a Lorin again.
Yeah.
And I just thought that, like, that would have been, that in my head, that would have been nice. Like, he dwelt in Tol Eressëa for a few years, still in the form that he had, just a bit more, like Gandalf the Super White or something. And then eventually, once they left the world, he was able to take his form again. And I just thought, like, how relieved would you be to, like, shed the body of that old weary man after thousands of years of wearing it? Like, I've seen you sigh sometimes when you take your bra off. I've seen you've come into the bedroom,
clothes?
Right? You've come into the bedroom and you just ripped your clothes off like quick as fuck, and you're like, so can you imagine how long and big that sigh would have been?
I just couldn't have been a wizard.
Well, do you know what made me think of? Do you remember when we were in New York and that first day when we walked like 14 miles?
Yeah, and
then we got
feet in the bath.
Yeah, we got back and we sat on the edge of the bathtub because Americans have like really low toilets and baths. It's weird as fuck.
So they don't have to cock their legs so hard.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because like it's really low, but like sometimes your bollocks go in the water. So what's all that about, America? Well, no, do you remember? It's like, while we're on the subject, do you remember when we got to where was it? Which one was it? It wasn't was it JFK in New York? Is it JFK?
Yeah.
And I went to the toilet, and do you remember when I came out and I was like,
no, we didn't fly to JFK. We flew to not Lincoln.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. We flew into New York, and I went to the toilet, and I came back, and I was like, I could see everybody just cutting about, like, just the gaps in the doors are so fucking big.
Yeah,
what's all that about?
Yeah, the gaps are really big. Like, I could just do like bend in half and crawl underneath someone's door.
I've seen a video of someone doing that, and it's like, it's terrifying. It's like this lad with like special needs, and he just crawls under someone's door, and like while the bloke's filming him while he's having a shit, and it's just weird. Anyway, yeah, that is, imagine what it would feel like, is dunking your feet in cold water after a long day walking, or you taking your clothes off because you just hate clothes. The third member is Radagast. Are you ready for some more names?
Yeah.
His real name is Iwendil, which is Quenya for lover of birds. For all the South Park fans amongst us, it's not like the chicken fucker. Radagast was a servant of Yavanna, and he also failed his mission, as I mentioned, as he became too enamoured with the birds and beasts and plants of Middle-earth. He fades out of the story after we meet... he's not in the Hobbit book, but he is in the Hobbit film, and he's not in the Lord of the Rings films, but he is in the Lord of the Rings books. And his part in the story ends when he meets Gandalf near Bree, and he lets Gandalf know that the Nazgul are about and sends him on to Saruman, where Gandalf then gets captured. And he's friends with the Eagles, so he sends Gwahir to look for Gandalf to take him news, and that's how he gets rescued. Radagast lived in Mirkwood on the western edge in a place called Rosgobel. That was for a while, though, and eventually he left. So all of the Istari were in Middle-earth around the year 1000 of the Third Age. That was when they all kind of like landed, give or take a few years either side. But when Elrond was summoning everyone to the Secret Council during the events of Fellowship of the Ring, they found Rosgobel empty, so he must have left. Radagast was known for using birds and beasts and eyes and ears, and he used this relationship with them to help Saruman search for the One Ring, because he was being, obviously he was none the wiser that Saruman wanted for himself, so he helped him search the Gladden Fields near the River Anduin, which is where Saruman has learned that the ring would be. But obviously it had been picked up by Smeagol at one point. He's a bit too trusting, this Radagast lad, because Saruman also says, Radagast, the fool, the simple-minded, he had just enough wit to play his part when he's gloating to Gandalf when he captures him. And as I've mentioned, he was one of the Maiar who set the Valar set to guard the elves at Cuiveanen, and we've already come across that. He was known during that time as Hravandil. Hravandil was his name right in the beginning. In terms of etymology of Radagast, there's not a great deal to say about him. Like, the Hobbit films give him a much bigger part than he had. He's not even in the story. He was in earlier writings. At one point in earlier versions of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, Gandalf referred to him as his cousin, which was interesting to think that Maiar had family. Obviously, some Maiar did, like Melian and Thorondor, if he was a Maiar. But yeah, in terms of etymology, Radagast has a few different potential sources. You ready?
Go on, then.
One is... what do you know about Gothic? The language? Do you know what it is? Or the culture? It's the oldest Germanic language. And in Old Gothic, there was a king called Radagaisus. And he is presented in some works and translations, particularly from the 19th century, as Radagast, and that with a H, and that seems super close to the mark, so probably on the money there. We also add that to the fact that Tolkien was a Gothic language and history nerd, so we're probably onto a winner there. Except, like Saruman, there is an Old English translation for Radagast, which means red-brown spirit. So that goes with his colour as well, yeah. What pisses me off about Radagast the most, right, is that he failed his mission because he was enamoured with the beasts and birds and that, yeah? Mm-hmm. But Gandalf is stated by Tolkien himself to have had more knowledge about beasts and birds anyway. So, the thing he failed his mission for, he wasn't even the best at.
Well, I think we're just ripping into Radagast at the minute. I feel really sorry for him.
Yeah, well, we don't know whatever happened to him, so if he was alive today, what do you think he'd be doing?
Just chilling, just leave him alone. He didn't ask for this.
That's true. Yavanna did beg Saruman to take him to Middle-earth.
He hasn't asked for this. Who cares if he's not the best at what he enjoys doing? Just fucking leave him alone.
Yeah, fair enough, okay. Radagast apologist.
Jeez.
No, fair enough. Yeah, he just. Yeah.
Why does everyone have to be so perfect? And
well, no. The thing is, he was given a job and he failed his job.
Yeah, but maybe he just wants to live on the dole. He wants to go and pick up his gyro. He wants to come home, sit, smoke some pipe weed with these hedgehogs.
Yeah.
Just let him be.
Not everyone's built for the world of work.
I wouldn't want to work for thousands of years.
Yeah, fair. Well, that's a fucking
about
lie.
Sharing his body.
You love working. You hate not having a routine.
Gandalf and how good that would feel. If you've worked for that long, jeez.
Oh, all right. Let's move on to the Blue Wizards, who are known as the Ithrin Luin in Sindarin, which just means the Blue Wizards, and they given names that weren't entirely canon or published, but they were in Tolkien's notes, were Alatar and Palando, and they both served Oromir. Radagast served Yavanna, if that wasn't clear. These two blue wizards, though, they went east and south, possibly southeast, and were never heard from again. They were speculated to be two of the 5 guardians that I mentioned earlier, which I think would fit quite nicely, because when Tolkien wrote that about the elves waking up, the Istari didn't exist as a concept yet, so it was just 5 guardians. And their given names right back in the beginning were Palasendo or Palakendo and Hymenar, which means far-seeing and far-farer, respectively. And the blue wizards, they're the source of endless speculation. Like, I've watched so many YouTube videos about them. And they dipped early in the story. They went east and south along with Saruman, but only he came back. He's the only one who came back west. And when he came back west, he settled in Orthanc. But those two were never seen again. Tolkien speculated that they still failed in their mission and instead founded secret cults of magic that long outlasted Sauron. And what's interesting is that Tolkien started writing a sequel to Lord of the Rings called The Long Shadow or something like that. And that focused around a cult in Gondor. He abandoned it because he realised it was like playing into the long defeat. So like it was like it didn't matter what you'd done because evil was still going to win, which he obviously went against his Catholic sensibilities, I'd imagine, because Eru obviously has a plan. So yeah. Other speculation though is that they were partially successful, and instead they prevented a much larger host of Haradrim and Easterlings from coming west in the War of the Ring. So it might have been that indirectly their work helped defeat Sauron because they stopped his army being like twice its size. Which, because like we need to remember, Sauron was gonna win. He would have won had the ring not been destroyed at the end by Gollum.
Yeah.
So like that, you need to remember that like it wasn't enough to hide the ring from him, because he would have won through military might.
Is that not like divine intervention though, that Gollum?
Yeah, that was Eru directly intervening. Yeah,
Gollum survived.
Gollum survived long enough to get to the where he needed to be to die. And I read this morning someone saying that like Gollum, what would Gollum's punishment be when he leaves the circles of the world? And someone said like his life was his punishment. Like, you know, so maybe Eru just considers things fair game once he gets through the doors, through the circles of the world. But no. So yeah, that was the Blue Wizards. There's not a great deal more to say about them. But of those 5 Istari, only one was successful. But in the end, they all served Eru's plan anyway, as we've seen time and time again. Radagast perhaps being the one to least serve the plan, in that he just didn't play the game.
That's the thing. It reminds me a lot of like Greek and Roman myths and how like the gods were kind of they just ended up doing what they wanted in the end.
Yeah.
Like they were there to serve Zeus.
Yeah.
But ultimately they had their quibs, their quarrels, and they just kind of fought it out. But equally, whatever they decided to do would lead to the ultimate end anyway.
Yeah, like the thing is, we talked about it last time, but like the once you start to realise about the cosmology of Eru's plan and like everything you do will ultimately serve the plan, you think like simultaneously, what's the point? And everything's the point. Like everything's if the destination's predetermined, like does it matter what you do on the journey?
And like when Sauron captures Gandalf and they're fighting against each other and stuff. It just Saruman, sorry. It just reminds me of like in the Iliad when all the gods are like they all take a side. They're either like one side or the other, and they just fight between each other, and it's like tit for tat.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, arguably, well, yeah, I can see your point, because Saruman says like you need to choose, like he essentially says like you need to choose the side that's going to win. Like I have.
Yeah.
And then that's when Gandalf claps back with, well, there's only one Lord of the Ring and he doesn't share power. Which is, that's...
And I suppose in this instance, they're like fighting for the ring to be in the right hands.
Yeah.
Or at least to be not in
the wrong hand, yeah.
Whereas like in the Iliad, it's like they're fighting for either side to win because of something silly in the beginning, where like in the beginning for the war over the ring, it's like this ring is being forged to make someone the most powerful. And in the beginning of the Iliad, 3 of the goddesses are arguing over who's the fairest, and that starts off like a massive war between humans. That these massive quarrels that affect races that it wasn't even involving anyway to start with.
Yeah, so a ring.
They kind of create their own problems to then.
Well, a ring is a superficial item.
Yeah.
Beauty is a superficial quality.
Yeah.
Well, physical beauty is a superficial quality.
But in them, like, having this drama, they then bring, like, humans into it.
Yeah.
And there's, like, loads of bloodshed.
Ooh, that's a very good point. Was that what you were researching earlier when you were typing notes up? Just looking at the Iliad.
It was something different, but...
Oh, well, what?
I was just looking at the Iliad and just kind of how each god steps in and does their kind of part to kind of force it in a certain direction.
Ah, well, just like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. Oh, well, do you have anything
Whereas Zeus just sits back.
Oh, dickhead, yeah.
He doesn't take sides, but he does intervene when needed.
Did your research tell you anything, lead you on to anything else?
Just the example that Gandalf is like a massive case of divine intervention in terms of like he's used as not a receptacle, like he's like the one that does Eru's business almost, like on Earth.
Yeah, he's not quite a Deus Ex Machina, but he is like the representation of the Holy Spirit, kind of like on Earth.
And in terms of him being brought back to life, like he's obviously very important.
Yeah, that was another instance of Eru's intervention.
And as well, the parallels between the way the creation of the world was similar to that of like the gods, the Greek and Roman gods, that they like ancient people believed that they created like the weather and everything. Really, they controlled everything, and they didn't have any regard to humans. There was like no real regard for humankind. They just kind of existed in a world that they governed, and humans kind of were just at their whim.
Ooh, that's it's a slightly more not fatalistic. It's a slightly more nihilistic view of humanity than we get presented with Tolkien. But funnily enough, you brought back the story of creation. A woman messaged me on Instagram yesterday called Ruth. Obviously, I'm not going to say her name, but she was called Ruth. And Ruth, she was saying that like vibration has been recently speculated to have played a part. Like that vibration has something to do with our like Big Bang and like the creation of various different things. And on that level, music is vibrations just in certain pitches and frequencies.
Particles all have had to have been agitated.
Yeah.
Like the original particles.
Should have got your dad on for this bit.
In like the dark matter.
Yeah.
For it to create like a Goldilocks effect. Create the perfect environment.
Yeah, well,
there has to be some sort of movement, doesn't there?
Yeah, well, so Ruth's point was that if you take like that agitation of particles and vibration, creating like wasn't like heat just like vibration of particles and stuff, like them moving around, right?
Heat can.
It moves it around, doesn't it? So yeah, but anyway, sorry, her point.
Charge, like there's multiple things.
Yeah, so her point was that vibration on that level and looking at it like that is music is vibration as well, and that is how in our minds creation and vibration are linked intrinsically, and hence like why we create beautiful music. And that might have played a small part in why the music behind Lindale was responsible for the creation of Ada and Aya.
Interesting.
But yeah, so apologies Ruth if I completely fucking butchered that, but it was a very interesting message you sent. Are you ready for this week's fun fact? Now that was a very high level of the Istari. It's a lot to take
like
in.
We need some light.
It is, well, it's more depressing for me, to be honest. This week is an anti-fun fact. No, it's not depressing in itself. It's depressing for what it means for me.
Okay.
So, for fuck long now, anybody who's listening to this podcast knows that I'm a big fan of saying that this Tolkien concept or this Tolkien creature is Lovecraftian. right? So, like, the Doors of Night, where Morgoth is chucked into the void, the nameless things that gnaw the bowels of the earth, the Watcher in the water that's got fingers on the end of its tentacles, Tol Eressëa, killing mortals quicker because of the light of the Valar, the Silmaril that Luthien wears kills her and Beren quicker because it's so beautiful, and the language of the Valar sounding horrible to listen to elves, like blah blah blah. I've said all of this is quite Lovecraftian, right? And I thought, deep in my heart, until today, Tolkien must have read Lovecraft at some point. He must have been a fan. And I was right, he had read it. In a letter to L. Sprague de Camp in 1964, sorry, L. Sprague de Camp, I know you're listening and I fucked your name up. Tolkien wrote comments on an anthology book called Swords and Sorcery that had stories by Lovecraft as well as Robert E. Howard, you know, the guy who created Conan the Barbarian. And he didn't care for the stories. Tolkien wrote to one of the authors of this book, all the items seem poor in the subsidiary, but to me not unimportant, matters of no clementure. Best when inventive, least good when literary or archaic. So he's saying there, like, I didn't really care for it. When you tried new things, I enjoyed it, but some of most of it I just didn't really care for. So he is confirmed to have read at least one Lovecraft story and didn't like it. So that's disappointing. So sad times for me. Seems like Tollers wasn't a fan of everyone's favourite old-timey cosmic horror guy. But I've had to come to terms with the fact that, like, Lovecraft didn't invent the fear of the unknown. He just, it's just the zeitgeist of the moment where we're really all picking up on it and loving Lovecraftian stuff. So yeah, that was my fun fact for this week.
It wasn't very fun, I'm going to be honest.
Was it not?
No.
Oh, shit, I'll have to try harder next week. It's just, it resolved a long-running thing for me.
It didn't have any animals in it.
No je ne sais quoi.
No cats.
There was no cat. I was thinking about making a TikTok about that, actually. Yeah, no cat. I can't think of any animal facts off the top of my head. I'm all eagled out. Oh, there's a fox that has sentient thought in the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. It watches Sam and Frodo leaving the Shire, and it thinks, like, in English, there must be something afoot. And then it slinks into a foxhole and you never hear from it again.
Are you having my life?
Nah, I'm just trying to think of animal facts off the top of my head. That's the one I can think of. There's a fox in the Fellowship of the Ring that has sentient thought. And it's like, oh, something must be up. And then it's like, oh, well, it goes on with its life.
That's cute.
Yeah, so that's the...
Oh, well, I enjoyed that. That was much better.
Oh, well, yeah. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of this episode. Thank you, Becca, for the research you did on the Iliad.
I mean, it didn't really come in much use, but...
No, it's still useful for your knowledge, and it's still useful for whoever's reading this. There might be someone who listens to this and be like, oh, yeah, maybe. I wonder if there is any link between Tolkien and like, Greek mythology, which there will be, So, well, if you look at Gondor on a map of, like, the real world, like Gondor and that, where all the battles are, it's pretty much like Rome. So, and Tolkien was a massive history nerd, so Roman and Greek myth would have played a big part in... There's a fucking pantheon of Valar? Of course there's going to be links to it. Okay, right.
That's another episode, guys.
That's a whole other episode, yeah. But yeah, I'm going to end it today because we've got the duvet over us and I'm sweating my tits off. You've got a hoodie on, so I don't know how the fuck you're doing that.
It's actually really cosy, but I could go to sleep.
Right, well, I'm going to say goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me too.
And we'll catch you next week.
Goodbye.